Raise your hand if your camp is looking for summer staff right now. That's what we're talking a little bit about today when we break down some of the findings from the Camp and Church Leadership Project's Summer Staff Survey. What motivates them to say yes to working at camp, and especially what are some of the things that we can put in place to support them this summer? Welcome to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, where we dive deep into theology, research, and practical wisdom for camps, retreat centers, and other key ministry spaces. I'm your host, Jared Rendell, camp enthusiast and part of the Sacred Playgrounds team. This podcast features Dr. Jake Sorensen, a scholar and practitioner who's helping leaders think more deeply about outdoor ministry and the impact it's making. Wonder with us what God might have in store at your Sacred Playground. Hey everybody, welcome to the playground. It's Jared and Jake from the Sacred Playgrounds team, here with another episode of the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. Hey Jake.
Hey Jared, how are you today?
I'm well. Yeah,
you're well.
I'm well. Yeah, I'm kind of hunkered in. My kiddos have one of them has been home most of this week, so in this still winter time and pandemic time, we're hunkered down at home, which is kind of the sentence for the last couple of years.
It is. It's been crazy. We've had kids at home. Whenever they have a little cough, they have to stay home, and that's been kind of the reality. And so we've been hunkered in too. But recently it's been fun being able to go to some of these conferences where everybody's vaccinated, everybody's masked, and I just got back from a big one with a bunch of youth ministry professionals, and it was a ton of fun. But my voice is feeling a little scratchy. I don't think I've talked so much, because I've been sitting in front of the computer screen. So it was just fun to interact with people and present on some of the findings that we've got from these projects, and just hear about ministry on the ground. It's been a long time since I've been able to interact in person with those folks.
So you got to do a couple workshops at this gathering that were. And this is where this is fun, right? Because of course we're talking camp, but as listeners have heard over and over again, what we're really talking is partnership over and over again, right? Between camp and these other things. So this was a bunch of mostly like parish-based, congregation-based youth ministry folks, or, some of them leaders of judicatories or whatever it might be. But you got to do things and share things from this research, of course, focused on camp, but all about how it could connect and matter for them.
Absolutely. It's camp embedded in this larger ecology of faith formation. We've said this over and over. Camp doesn't stand on its own. It's related to all these other ministries, and it has to be intentionally related. We can't just assume that these other things are in place. We have to intentionally connect it when we're in the camp environment, or when we're in the congregational environment and somebody comes back from the camp experience. And so there's so many intentional partnerships that we can do. And, that's one of the big things that Sacred Playgrounds is all about, is strengthening those partnerships and sort of upping the conversation on camping ministry as this important piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, amen. So from a research standpoint, one of the pieces of that puzzle where these things intersect a bunch is in this Camp and Church Leadership Project. Literally in the title, these intersections are right there, and we know we've learned a bunch about how the leadership development is one place where these ministries are really connected in experiences that leaders have in kind of one place or the other, and how they connect and interact. So today our plan, everybody, is to focus on what's really like really fresh data, really recent data about summer staff in particular. So that's what we're talking about, the findings from the summer staff survey that happened last summer. Before we dive in, Jake, can you give us a kind of state of the project? Give us a current Camp and Church Leadership Project status update.
Absolutely. So this is the third major phase of data gathering, and it's the last one. It was kind of the culmination of the project in a lot of ways, and it'll lead to other things. But we started off with these interviews with past summer staff members, some of whom are clergy, some of whom are not, but are just connected to the church. We were interested in what part or what role their working on summer staff played in their faith formation, their call to ministry, and so forth. And then after that, we did the big clergy survey where we got over 3,000 responses from clergy members in the Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, and connected all those things. And that was the main thing that I was presenting on at this recent conference.
Mm.
Was kind of how camp fit in with these other ministry spaces, and especially as one of the big four ministries that we've talked about in the past, along with Sunday school, these national youth conventions, and campus ministry. And then we took all those data points from those first two phases of the project, and we did a survey of summer staff members. And this happened just this past summer in 2021. We focused again on Lutheran camps because that's kind of where the study is living inside the Lutheran Church, but it's very relevant to other denominations as well, of course, of Christian camps. And what we did was, in this part of the project, we surveyed the summer staff at the very beginning of the summer, so like the day they arrived or within a couple days of arrival at camp during staff training, and then we surveyed them again at the end of the summer. And so the goal here was to see what sort of experiences were they coming in with, so what are these other pieces of the puzzle for them, and then what was their experience during the summer, and how did they view these experiences after the summer was over. But then we could also measure from the first day to the last day of camp, sort of like what we do in the Effective Camp Project. But in the Effective Camp Project, we only do for the week, right? First day of the week, last day of the week. This time, we're measuring the entire summer to see if there's growth in a whole bunch of these different measurements. And so it was a really intense project and fun. We had 50 camps participate. We heard from over 1,000 summer staff members, and a whole bunch of them, well over 500, completed both the before camp and the after camp survey. So we've got a big data set and a lot of really interesting findings that I just want to, I mean, we only have a little bit of time here, but to dive into a bit today.
This reminds me of some of the effective camp stuff in the way that we have sort of all assumed, yeah, camp's good. camp's important. We know that camp has impact, especially, for the folks who ended up sticking around or being staff members, or, to our points, leading to other roles within the church. But there hadn't really been the numbers around it. There hadn't really been the data around it. And so that's part of what Effective Camp was about. This feels similar to that, where we think that summer staff experiences matter, right? We think that there's growth that happens. Everybody's, so many stories are, that I was kind of hearing my faith, and then one of my most impactful summers, I absolutely attribute my first summer at camp was a massive step of my faith. I have often described it as it was finally the summer where my relationship with God went from one of the things that was part of my life to the sun things were orbiting around. And I absolutely thought that was my first summer at camp that attributed to that leap. So we've heard or have those stories. I'm so interested to hear in what that looks like on a bigger scale in terms of data. This is where data gets cool.
I totally agree. I mean, we have a hunch, and then we go in to investigate it. What's really interesting about these two projects, so Effective Camp, we went in understanding that our personal stories were, incredibly impactful for us, life-changing for us, and prepared to sort of see that statistically there's not really that much change in the camper population. Like we maybe were exceptions to the rule. And so we were, pleasantly surprised to find all of these data points about the impacts of the summer camp experience, the 1 week summer camp experience. And so when we moved into the staff study, like there's an expectation, right? Okay, so we found all of these impacts from the 1 week experience. A full summer of experience serving on summer camp staff, these numbers are going to be through the roof. Every single one of these things is going to show incredible change across the data set. And it wasn't necessarily the case. It was more complicated than that. It is so interesting as we dive into this to see some of the specific things that showed the change and some of the specific things that caused the positive outcomes. And then some of the diversity of experiences for these young adults that were working at camp. The experience itself mattered. The community that they were in mattered. The support that they received mattered. So when we think of the camper experience, I mean, in so many ways, the camp experience is it centers on the campers, right? As it should.
Right.
Those are the guests. And so we want those young people to have a great time and to be impacted. And that's what it focuses on. And because of that, camp is incredibly successful for the campers. And also, it can be successful for the staff members, but it's not as universal as we might expect.
Interesting. So let's talk about some. Let's dive in a little bit. Some of these, we might just call it the big initial kind of hit us findings, some of these main positive experiences for these camp staff members. What rose to the top?
Well, leadership was the thing that absolutely was far and away the biggest outcome from the experience of working on summer camp staff. And that makes sense, right? I mean, these young people, they're a lot of them are 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, something like that, young adults, and they're getting the chance to lead, and not just lead alongside, but to like take the reins. I mean, there's something about that where you do this staff training, and you get all these curriculum and policies and all this, and then suddenly you've got a cabin full of kids, and it's you and these 7 or 8 kids, and it's like, oh my gosh, I'm really in charge of these young people, like of their safety, of their mental and emotional safety, along with their physical and spiritual safety. Leading them from place to place, getting them places on time. It's a huge responsibility, and so it develops leaders, absolutely. And this is something that we've seen from other camp studies in terms of like the big directions study of ACA, but this one is focused specifically on summer camp staff. And so it was a huge percentage. It was over 90%, 94% agreed that they grew in their leadership abilities during the summer. And the item that grew the most across all the different groups from the beginning of summer to the end of summer was, I feel confident in my ability to be a leader. And so that was far and away the biggest finding, that the camp staff experience really does foster leadership development and confidence in leadership abilities. But that wasn't the only thing. 92% agreed that the experience had a significant impact on their lives. Over 3/4 agreed that they were strengthened in their faith. 86% grew in their self-confidence. And so we've got all of these different findings that these overwhelming percentages of summer staff had a positive experience and saw personal growth in their lives.
That's a good case for the model overall, right? These very experiential learning where, you're not, this isn't an experience where you sit back and are passively taught something, how you actually develop these things. Some of the absolute roots of camp is experiential learning. And so this model that is fully immersive, you're doing it, and then you're doing it again the next week. And then no matter how tired you are, you're doing it again the next week is a bit of a case for that, kind of model, that way of doing things.
And exhaustion is right. I mean, it's hard, right?
Yeah.
I mean, you and I both know that because we've had the experience, but seeing it in the survey was really eye-opening in terms of exhaustion and burnout, and how those things at the end of the summer correlated so strongly with the experience itself, but also the growth in terms of self-confidence and other things like that. So everybody grows in leadership, and people grow in these other constructs as well. But it's a hard thing, and making sure that we're supportive of these staff members is incredibly important for their experience, and through them, the experience of their campers.
Okay, so right now we're in the spot where a lot of summer camps are in the middle of finding their summer staff. Right? They're getting ready for these seasonal things, and applications are open, and some visits are happening, phone calls are happening, interviews are happening. So as these camp leaders are doing this, what did we see? What did we hear about the motivations for people working at camp? Why are people saying yes to work at camp these days?
Well, there are a few key reasons that we can look at from the survey, because we asked that question. What are the motivations? And we had a whole list. But then we also asked them, kind of an open-ended question: what do you hope to get out of your experience? And so we asked it in 2 ways. And so far and away, the highest response was community and making friends. And so the opportunity to be embedded in a caring, supportive community of young people, that was the thing that they were after and they were looking forward to. And a lot of times that was connected to their faith. I want to be in a community of Christians, intentional Christian community. I want to be in a supportive community. Um, I want to make lifelong friends. I mean, those sorts of things were the primary motivating factors. And so, if we're looking, if I'm a camp director and I'm looking to sell the experience, that's the thing I'm going to emphasize the most, based
Mhm.
on the findings from this study. Community, friendship, support, intentional Christian community, those sorts of things. Um, the young people are really hungry for.
Mm.
And I would say, especially during the time of COVID, where there's been so much virtual and there's been so much time away from these intentional communities, um, we can really sell that as this is something that is an immersive experience. You're not just going to work, you know, 8 to 4, 9 to 5, whatever it is. You're not just working a shift here. You are working alongside people that are going to become your best friends. Um, you and I can attest to that, right?
Truth.
Um, I can think of so many people that I worked alongside in summer staff communities, that I consider among my best friends,
Yeah.
and that's what
Likewise.
these young people are looking for first and foremost. Um, so, in terms of the second thing they're looking for a fun experience, right? Like, I want to have a good time. I want to be somewhere where um, I can enjoy myself. And so this is an enjoyable job. You get to do a lot of fun things.
Hmm.
You get to go canoeing or go horseback riding or a high ropes course or play games or sing songs or sit around a campfire or whatever you have at your camp, right? Go swimming all summer. Get a good tan. Like, so some of these just experiential pieces, like, you're going to be alongside a community of young people who is caring, intentional Christian community, and you're going to have fun while doing it. You're going to have just an absolute blast this summer. So those are important selling points in terms of, like, this is a job, but like, sometimes you're gonna end the week saying, wait a minute, I get paid for this.
Yeah. Yeah. If you can end there, that's a good question. Well, whether it's summer camp or thinking about future career, that's a really good question. If you can find find joy and surprise and I get to do this and get paid, that's amazing.
So that fun element is an important selling point.
Hmm.
But then also personal growth. Like, the incoming staff member said, I'm here to grow as a person. Um, the most common response was to grow in my faith,
Hmm.
but there were also responses in terms of grow in my leadership abilities, grow in my self confidence, grow as a person. Just kind of this idea of, I'm going to get more experiences. I'm going to be a better human being because of this experience. And so we can sell that personal growth piece as well.
Hmm.
This isn't just a job. You're not just going to get paid for it. You're going to develop as a person through this experience. And a lot of young people are looking for that. And if they're not looking for that, then they probably shouldn't work at camp, right? I mean,
Yeah.
because that's a big part of what the experience is about. It's so immersive. And then
Hmm.
the fourth big reason was this this idea of service, this idea of giving of myself.
Sure.
A lot of them would say things like giving back to the campers, what I experienced in my camp experiences. So a lot of these incoming staff members had been campers or had been staff members
Hmm.
previously, and they've been personally impacted. So of the ones who were returning staff members, who had been at camp before, 97% agreed that their camp experiences had a significant impact on their life, and 88% agreed that camp experiences helped them personally through a difficult time in their life. And so these are young people
Mm.
who have been dramatically impacted by camp and have been helped through challenging times, and they want to provide that for other people. So it's this giving heart, right? And those are the people we want on staff, right? We want people that are
Amen.
there for others, for the campers.
Hmm.
And so it's interesting when we ask, what do you hope to get out of the experience? and they say, what I hope to get out of the experience is to give.
Hmm.
That's sort of a beautiful thing.
Truth.
And so I would advise our camp leaders as their recruiting staff to think about those 4 motivations:
Mm-hmm.
community, friendship, fun, personal growth, and giving back. This idea of service to others.
So here's set of takeaways number 1, everybody, and then we'll take a break right after this and talk a little bit more specifically about last summer. Right, this last summer too has been unique, and this survey happened over the course of that, and so some specific findings about that were interesting. Before we go, so as you look at those motivations, here's where to check. Right, 1, check kind of the words that you're saying when you're talking to these staff members. Right? Have a sit down with those that are doing recruiting and get some of these keywords, get some of these ways of saying that for your particular context. Right, write some words and phrases that you're going to say when you're talking to these folks. 2, check your websites and your social pages and your your boards. If you're doing a visit or something like that, check the pictures and check the words. Right, we want to show community, show fun. Yeah, of course, some with the campers, but a group of those staff members hanging out together. Those visuals, especially with how image driven we are today. If you're putting a video together, make sure some of those videos are showing the experience of those staff together. So lay those motivations over the ways that you're talking and the story that you're telling when you are connecting with these folks, especially the ones for the first time. So there's your takeaway for now. We'll probably have more at the end. Let's take a little break, and then we'll come back and talk about last summer in particular.
Do you like what you're hearing? Go deeper into the research and best practices of Christian camping with Sacred Playgrounds, the book. This brand new resource is Jake's most comprehensive contribution to the field of outdoor ministry. It is loaded with stories and research from Christian camps across the country and around the world. It traces the history and theology of outdoor ministry, focusing on the 5 fundamental characteristics of Christian summer camp. This is the premier resource for Christian camp professionals, church leaders, camper parents, and all those passionate about camping ministry. Order Sacred Playgrounds wherever you get your books.
All right, here we are. Welcome back, everyone. So, Jake, this last summer, right? This survey happened over the course of last summer of 2021, and we all know that it was a unique summer. Now, camp, like we've talked about in a couple previous episodes, got to stay open when lots of other things were closed because of the uniqueness of the situation, being outside, et cetera, et cetera. We get to stay open and got to do maybe not fully sort of what would have been normal, but what does that mean anyway these days? And so, but camp was open. Camp was running for the most part. Almost all camps were open last summer. And so these staff members had, got to have a full experience, but there are, of course, some unique things that we learned from this particular summer, right?
Yeah. So, I mean, last summer was a atypical summer. It was an odd summer in a lot of ways. And we heard from the staff members, we heard from the camp directors about how odd the summer was. And so just to kind of put it in context, it was COVID-19 still. It was kind of the continuation summer of COVID-19.
Mm-hmm.
But the previous summer, 2020, the majority of the camps were closed or had very limited operations. So they didn't do normal summer camp. And so that meant that their returning staff members, most of them for 2021, had not been on staff the previous summer. And so there were a lot of new staff members, but a lot of the returning staff members had been on staff in, say, 2019,
sure,
or 2018. So it was very different cycle for these young adults, and an interesting experience. There was a gap in their summer staff experience. The other thing is that it was an incredibly difficult hiring environment in 2021. vaccine was starting to get widespread, there was a lot of hope of things going back to normal. And so everything started opening up and all the vacation destinations started opening up and everybody was hiring. And so it was a very difficult hiring environment. And so a lot of the summer camps were short staffed. They had, you know, I talked to some folks during staff training. Like we're talking about the first week of June or the last week of May, and they had, you know, they were short 5 or 6 counselors. I mean, that is really a challenge. And so they're hiring people during the summer. They're trying to fill gaps with other folks. So it was a very difficult staff experience in that way. That put pressure on all these other staff members that were on site. They have to do extra things, go the extra mile, which of course they were willing to do, but it's exhausting.
Yeah.
The other thing to remember is that we're in a global crisis right now, and everybody's feeling it. Everybody's tired, and it's putting pressure on mental health. And this is true in some ways, especially for these young adults who maybe didn't get the end of their high school that they were expecting and haven't had the college experience that they were expecting. And so a lot of things are up in the air during a very difficult transition time in life. And so mental health concerns were really through the roof for these young people coming into summer. And so we've got some statistics nationally that are coming out, but a lot of that won't come out until like next year when we've done all the when they've done all the surveys at the national level. But even prior to COVID, mental health concerns were on the rise, and we can see that in UCLA's HERI studies of incoming freshmen. So emotional health and mental health concerns were already on the rise prior to COVID-19, and it was just exacerbated by the pandemic and during the pandemic. And so some of the indicators, I mean, we get a sense of 69% of the incoming staff members this past summer reported having feelings of overwhelming anxiety at least monthly. Over 2/3 overwhelming anxiety at least monthly. A third of them came in saying that they had had thoughts of self-harm at least once or twice in the months prior to camp.
Wow.
56% reported feeling very down or hopeless at least monthly. I mean, so you've got these major mental health concerns and red flags among these summer staff members. And this directly affected their experience, right? Especially if when they were short staffed and if they didn't feel like they had enough support.
Yeah.
And so when I told you earlier that, you know, we sort of expected there to just be universal growth across the board. Well, we had that in leadership and to some extent in self-confidence. But it wasn't as universal as we expected. And it's because of some of these other factors. And mental health concerns is one of them. So these young people that came in with mental health concerns, they didn't necessarily have mental health professionals at camp or somebody that they could turn to. It might have just been their supervisor. And, you know, if I'm having a mental health crisis or a concern, I'm not going to my supervisor,
right?
You know, because that person controls my job. They might just say, we don't need you on staff
You're not
anymore.
ready for
I'm
this
sorry.
right now.
Yeah, you're not healthy enough to be here, whatever, right? I mean, it's a difficult position to put somebody in. And so, you know, my encouragement for all of our camps for this coming summer is to make sure that you are resourced for mental health. You need to have somebody there who's available, who's not a supervisor for your summer staff members. That might be somebody who's there for the entire summer. Maybe it's a chaplain, you know, that they can talk with and who can refer people to professionals. Maybe it's a professional counselor or an intern or somebody like that. And maybe you can't fill a single role and you have to have people there week to week. Then do that. Connect with a school counselor. Connect with, you know, local pastors that can be on site during the week and say, this is the person that you can talk to this week if you have a need.
Right. I wonder what pastors on sabbatical. Like, I wonder what, like, a sabbatical role, you know, that a lot of times they're looking for things. That'd be really interesting.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of different options. But what I'm emphasizing is that this is not optional. This is a need. We need to take care of our staff's mental health, because the folks that came in with mental health concerns, they were far more likely to report having some of these mental health concerns during the summer. They were less likely to feel supported by their supervisors, by their fellow staff members, and this is because they're getting the same level of care as the person who doesn't come in with mental health concerns, right? So if we're offering kind of this base level of care for everybody, you know, just treating everyone equally, there's some people that have more needs, specifically around mental health. And we need to recognize that and make sure the resources are there for these folks. And so, just to give an indicator of how widespread this is again, I mean, I mentioned a few of those mental health indicators. So it was about a third. So about a third of the staff came in with none of these red flags. A third came in with like one or two of these red flags, and a third came in with 3 or 4 of these major red flags in terms of mental health. And so you kind of think of your staff that way, that some of them, there's varying needs, but it is very widespread. A large proportion of your staff is going to need some sort of specialized care.
That's helpful, because that allows, even just knowing that, and if that's our assumption, rather than what is probably the most common assumption, that everybody's fine and we'll deal with something if it comes up, right? A very reactive kind of way of doing things. If we come in with an assumption about what you just said, kind of a third, that allows us to do something different proactively. Yeah, that's really wise.
And acknowledge it, right? Acknowledge it and say, this is a concern and we want to help you. And here is how we're going to help. We want you to have a positive experience. So one more thing for our camp directors to keep in mind in terms of mental health during the summer. Every single camp that participated in the study had at least one staff member who had thoughts of self-harm during the summer. Every one of them. And so there is somebody on your summer staff, and probably multiple folks, right? But making sure that you have resources there is incredibly important, because we do not want to deal with tragedy.
And all the other things that's affected, right? How many stories did we hear, right? How many times did we have a director or program director who ended up counseling for a week because they had to either dismiss staff members or staff members quit or whatever it is. So again, if we can, camps are nimble and ready to be reactive and pivot when we need to. We've talked some about that in previous episodes. How much more can we do if we have our heads on about this on the front end here and can do something about it and can be proactive, which is better care for these people and the world from a faithful and spiritual perspective anyway.
Yeah, I think this mental health crisis is something that it's worth really diving into more. And so even doing a full episode on something like that is maybe in our future.
Thanks.
But I just wanted to lift it up in this one for our camp directors to keep in mind, and if they're able to say as the recruiting staff that we have resources and here's how we're going to address these things, that can be helpful as well.
So that's a key factor in creating space for the kind of growth, the kind of all these things we're hoping for, all these things that tie back to their motivations. Creating space for that. There's some factors that lead into that, and we know right now in our current environment, in the current kind of climate of these people, that mental health is an important part of it.
Yes, absolutely, it is. Absolutely. The second thing that I really want to lift up, we got uber serious for a second. This is also serious, but it has to do with a faith community. We're camps that are faith-based, and we need to make sure that we're hiring people of faith. And it's really difficult sometimes in a challenging hiring environment to make sure that we're hiring people that are on fire for Jesus. And it is incredibly important. So we had different measurements of staff faith commitment coming into camp. There were belief statements, things like, I believe Jesus rose from the dead. I believe God created the world. And then there were statements about the importance of faith in our daily life. We call it like horizontal faith or faith relevance. Faith is important to my daily life. There's people that I can turn to, Christians that I can turn to. regular church attendance is important. There were things like this as well. And so we kind of took those together and looked at sort of faith commitment, and where our young people were in terms of faith commitment. And it was kind of surprising, the difference among the camps, and that there were some camps that had only a minority of their summer staff in this sort of highly committed category faith. I was surprised by that.
Yeah.
And
because that's another
what we-
assumption that you would make, right? That yeah, everybody who works at Bible Camps on Fire for Jesus, of course.
Well, and as a parent, when I send my young person to a Christian camp, I expect them to be around people of faith. And that doesn't mean that I expect them to be around people that have it all figured out or have the best theology or anything like that, but that want to follow Jesus, right?
Yeah.
And are trying their darndest and want to learn more, and things like that. And there were some folks on summer staff at these camps that we studied that, they weren't all that interested in faith. And it wasn't just the church. It was also, questioning, do I even believe in God sort of thing. And now we're always going to have some of those folks on staff, right? Because young people, they're at a crazy time of life, right? And surrounding them with a faith community becomes incredibly important. But here's the thing that we can really see in this survey: they need to be surrounded by a faith community. And if the community itself is not, say, majority committed Christian, then it doesn't become a healthy environment to grow in your faith. In fact, it becomes an environment that challenges your faith. So when you're having these individual conversations, so when I was on summer staff, I was part of a staff. There were some people that were skeptical, of course, but the majority of the staff was really, say, on fire for Jesus, right? We wanted to learn more about the faith. We wanted to share our faith with one another. On the weekends, we would sit around the campfire and we would sing Christian songs, and we would pray together. We would worship together on our own. I mean, that's kind of wild to think about, right? But that's what you get when you hire people of faith. They want to share their faith with each other. When you hire people that are overtly skeptical, that skepticism just grows in your camp community, and it causes more people to question. And that's what's really interesting about the findings here, is that when we take a summer staff person who's, say, not very committed to their faith, and when we embed them into a staff community where the majority of the people on staff are committed Christians, they tend to grow in their faith. They tend to grow in their understanding of some of the belief statements. For instance, their belief that Jesus rose from the dead, their belief that it's important to be part of the church. But if you do the opposite, so if you take somebody who is a committed Christian, who is, say, quote unquote, on fire for Jesus,
sure,
and we put them in a staff community that is, again, a caring staff community, they're making good friends, and a lot of the majority of the people on the staff are questioning the faith, it becomes a challenging environment for that committed Christian. We actually see declines in faith measurements. And so it's right here in the data. So it becomes really important to surround these folks with people of faith. And the people who are committed Christians tend to have a much more positive experience at camp. They're at a Christian camp.
Yeah.
If it's a person who's not so sure about their faith, then maybe we can include them depending on our the makeup of our staff. But maybe they would be better at a different camp, a camp that doesn't emphasize faith as much, because this is a camp where we're going to ask you to share your faith. We're going to ask you to lead a Bible study. We're going to ask you to give a testimony. And if you're just not going to be comfortable doing that, then maybe this isn't the right spot.
Yeah. And
so recognizing that when we're out there hiring, I think, is really important. We, of course, are welcoming of all people. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm not saying exclude. I'm saying, who are you choosing to hire as your ministry leaders?
Yep.
These are ministers of the gospel that you're hiring. Again, they don't have to have it all figured out. But make sure that you're asking those questions when you're doing your interviews. are you comfortable with this? Where are you at in your faith?
Mm-hmm.
Tell me your faith story. That was my favorite question. Whenever I was interviewing potential summer staff members, tell me about your faith story. And I would get these incredibly complex stories about, where they are in their faith and what they're thinking right now. And, maybe they're struggling right now. Maybe they're at a time of strength, and that's going to go up and down in our lives, but we want people that are on a path of discipleship, and wanting to learn more, wanting to dive deeply, and willing to be part of this intentional Christian community. I know that's hard in a challenging environment of hiring, but it becomes important.
Yeah. Okay, that's two. Kind of two key factors to these positive experiences. We've got one more, right?
Yeah, we got one more. The third one is the importance of support and agency.
Okay.
And so we asked the summer staff members how supported they felt by their supervisors, how supported they felt by their summer staff members, whether they felt like their role fit in with the mission and vision of the camp, and a whole bunch of other questions. And from these, we put together sort of this index about the feelings of support and agency. And the more support and agency they felt, the more they grew in all these different constructs, including their faith, but also in leadership and self-confidence, and so forth. So making sure that we have a supportive environment where it's clear how each person fits in. And when we're talking about young adults, this means one-on-ones. This means you particularly feel cared for. You feel like you fit in. You feel like your supervisor cares about you. And so having these structures for them becomes really important. And what we find is some camps are really good at this, and some camps aren't.
Yeah.
And so it happens around the ethos of the summer staff experience. Who are the summer staff for the camp? Are they employees? Are they workers? Are they also people whom you seek to influence and you seek to lift up? We have some camps who it's in their very DNA that one of their primary missions is to care for and raise up leadership skills in their summer staff members. And so they intentionally work for that. They don't just try to prepare these young people so that they can minister to the campers, right? That can turn into this environment of chew them up and spit them out, which we saw among a lot of these summer staff. They were so tired. They were almost jaded by the end of the summer because they felt like they weren't appreciated. They felt like they were told to go with no rest. And some of them don't want to come back. And on the flip side, some of them felt incredibly cared for and supported. And even though it was hard, it was worth it. And they understood that it was worth it. And so it's a shift of understanding and caring for our summer staff members. And guess what? The camps that had more support, more agency, they had higher staff retention too. Not shocking at all, right?
To our deep surprise. That's helpful. As we see what we learned about what is making a positive experience, we kind of overlay that with these motivations, and then to hear these three factors that really are the turnkeys that make a difference for a positive experience. So as we close up here, I feel like there are some kind of milestones of where we need to take what we heard, take what we learned here, and apply them. And right now is one of them during hiring and interviewing. It feels like a key time to say, okay, what are these motivations? What space do we want to create to make a positive experience? There's a start to that right now. Right? So there's milestone number one, everyone. Another one happens when they get there, during your staff training experiences, because that's where you're laying the groundwork for these factors, to start these things, to start off these positive experiences, right? And like you heard Jake talk about between things like one-on-ones and keep checking in throughout the summer. And again, having others there, having that support system that consists of someone checking in on mental health, good conversations with supervisors, space where they can feed and lean into each other, all of that during the summer. And then the last kind of milestone check-in point that we often just say, we're so tired and we're done. but it is right after, right? The evaluation, whether that's right at the end of camp or especially even after they get home, that feels like another milestone to check in on these things, because those are the spots that are going to make a difference if they're maybe coming back in future summers. And so we've got these couple points where we can overlay the kinds of things we've been talking about today.
Yeah. And I would say to make sure also the ongoing during the summer that you're checking in with your staff. That's a big support piece. Like staff training is great. And who your staff are that are struggling and what they're going through because you've heard your stories. And if you heard their stories, and if you haven't heard their stories, then you need to sit down and listen to their stories. But it's also, you might have a large staff. If you got 30, 40, 50, 60, 100 staff, you probably need a list. And you need to systematically make sure that you're checking in on everybody. And that's your whole leadership team, or it's you yourself. Are you checking in with these people? When was the last time you checked in with this person to make sure that they're okay, to make sure that they feel supported, to make sure that they feel heard? That becomes an incredibly important task during the summer as well.
Well, thanks for listening, everyone. This becomes so important, right? Because reality is especially these seasonal staff, are the ones that are really the bridge. They're really the ones that are activating, delivering the ministry. So of course, this is stuff that really, really matters. So continue to apply these things now as you're getting ready, and then throughout the summer. Let us know if you want to dive in a little more. If you are curious about things, we've got more that we're gonna create and get out. Some more kind of quick facts about this that you'll be able to download and look through and talk with other leaders about, things like that. So more to come on this project overall, and even in particular with this summer staff group. Thanks for listening. We'll see you next time on the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. Thanks for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. This episode was produced by me, Jared Rendell, and featured Dr. Jake Sorensen, lead researcher and founder at Sacred Playgrounds, LLC. Our theme music was written and performed by Taylor Wilson. You can find his original songs wherever you get your music. Learn more and connect with the Sacred Playgrounds team at sacredplaygrounds.com.